When I first landed at Narita Airport, a large sign greeted me. In English it read, "Welcome to Japan." Simple enough, but right below it, the Japanese text read something closer to "Welcome home." At the time, I just figured it was a translation quirk, one version for the visitors, one for those returning. But that small, quiet difference, that gap between welcome and welcome home, it stuck with me. Because as I began my new life as an assistant language teacher, I started seeing that gap everywhere, in the staff room, in the classroom, in the polite and identical greetings. I was in the school, but I wasn't of the school. I was visible, but peripheral. And I slowly realized that airport sign wasn't a mistake at all. It was the entire instruction manual. That opening really, it just cuts right to the core tension we're getting into today.
Yeah, absolutely does.
We're taking a deep dive into the whole structural reality of English language teaching systems in Northeast Asia. And our focus is, squarely on Japan's incredibly fragmented assistant language teacher model, the ALT model.
Yeah, and we'll be contrasting that with what's happening in places like South Korea and Taiwan and even Hong Kong.
And this is so important because it moves past that sort of glossy brochure narrative of cultural exchange.
Exactly. Our mission here is to really excavate the structural and cultural forces that define what it means to be a foreign educator in these places.
We're trying to answer a pretty fundamental question, aren't we?
We are. Do these systems actually foster real professional integration and, sustainable educational growth?
Or are they just designed to manage distance, to keep people at arm's length?
And to use cheap, flexible labor, while at the end of the day reinforcing a kind of pre-existing linguistic elitism. We're going to be navigating some really fragmented employment models, some, frankly, deeply cynical labor practices.
And these profound cultural expectations that you can feel in every single staff room and classroom.
That's a deep topic.
Okay, so let's start with just the sheer scale and I guess the complexity of the Japanese system.
Right.
We're talking about a workforce of around 20,000 ALTs, 20,000 people working in Japanese public schools every single year.
And that term, ALT, Assistant Language Teacher, it was officially coined by MEXT, the Ministry of Education, through the original GG program.
Though you also hear other terms, right, like AET or NESA.
Yeah, Assistant English Teacher, Native English-Speaking Assistant, they're all trying to standardize a position that is, in reality, anything but standard.
And the whole job is built on a very specific structural feature.
It is. The role usually requires a bachelor's degree, but, and this is the critical part, unlike every single one of their Japanese colleagues, it typically does not require a teaching license.
No certification.
None. And that immediate professional gap, that's the foundation. It's the foundation on which this entire system of precarity is built.
That professional gap, you combine it with the employment structure, and you get what is, I think, accurately described as a severe patchwork system.
It's a complete patchwork.
Yeah.
If you look at the 2023 data, this fragmentation is it's glaring. It slices the entire foreign teaching workforce into three main and often competing categories.
So what's the biggest slice of the pie?
The biggest piece, a staggering 34%, is controlled by private dispatch companies.
Okay, so these are basically temp agencies for teachers.
That's a perfect way to put it. There are commercial businesses that bid for contracts with local boards of education, the BOEs, to supply foreign teachers.
And after them.
Then you have the national government-run JT program. That accounts for about 28%.
And the last major group?
That would be the direct hire employees. They make up about 20%. They work directly for a city's board of education or a municipality.
And the rest is just sort of other.
Exactly. Private foundations, university partnerships, things like that. But the result of this fragmentation is that there's zero common standard. No common training, no shared evaluation, no curriculum, not even a basic job definition that applies everywhere.
So an ALT in one city could have a stable, well-paid job.
While an ALT in the very next prefecture is commuting to 10 different schools for what amounts to poverty wages, it's that inconsistent.
Let's focus on the JET program first. It's the oldest, it's the most famous, it's often held up as the gold standard.
It is, but even JET is built on this really deep inherent contradiction.
And that contradiction is how the program is framed.
Exactly. JGT is explicitly, and I would say forcefully, presented as a program for cultural exchange. It is not framed as a path to long-term employment or a professional career.
Even though the vast majority, something like 90%, are ALTs. They're teachers.
The others are CIRs, coordinators for international relations, who are often in government offices, or the very few Cs, sports exchange advisors.
So that cultural exchange framework is very convenient because it justifies really high turnover.
There's a whole justification. You get a good salary, sure. It starts around $280,000 a month, goes up to $300,000 in the second year. But that stability is designed to be temporary.
Because you're capped. A maximum of 5 years, and in some places, it's even shorter, only 3 years.
And the structural consequence of that mandatory term limit is just.
Yeah.
It's profound. If your goal is just cultural diversity, then okay, rotating new faces every few years makes sense.
But if the goal is high-quality, sustainable English education,
it's a complete failure. Education requires pedagogical continuity, it requires institutional memory, and this system arbitrarily removes highly experienced educators right at their peak.
right when they finally mastered the curriculum, built rapport with students, and figured out how to navigate the culture.
And you replace them with a rookie. It not only sabotages educational continuity, it imposes this harsh precarity on dedicated people who might have wanted to build a life in Japan. Their professional effort is, by design, structurally rejected.
Okay, so JET's in the middle. Below that, we have the dominant model, the dispatch companies, 34% of the workforce. This is where the exploitation gets really visible.
Oh, absolutely. The dispatch model is a perfect example of a race to the bottom. Educational quality is just completely sacrificed for cost savings.
How do they do that?
These companies extract the maximum value by winning bids based on the lowest possible price. And that low price is directly translated into exploiting their foreign workers. You see it right in the pay rates.
They're paid a lot less.
Substantially less than their JET or direct hire counterparts. Some of those salaries dip dangerously low, sometimes down to $180,000 a month, or even less.
Which in a city like Tokyo or Osaka, that's near the poverty line.
Or below it. And it's not just the low pay. It's the unsustainable workload that comes with it.
I saw one account of a first-year dispatch ALT who was rotating across 11 different schools.
11. Imagine that.
Whoa.
It's logistically impossible. You can't build meaningful rapport. You can't deliver consistent educational quality.
You can't possibly be expected to co-plan with Japanese teachers or evaluate students or build any kind of relationship when you're constantly on the move like that.
You can't. You're reduced to being, instant entertainment. You're a warm body with a specific accent. You're fundamentally incapable of achieving any deeper pedagogical goals.
But the truly, I think, cynical mechanism for exploitation here involves the contracts themselves. This is the whole issue of the 29.5-hour work week.
This is a critical point. It's a real insight into the system's DNA. Many of these private companies intentionally structure their contracts for exactly 29.5 hours per week.
And why that specific number?
Because under Japanese labor law, to be eligible for mandatory social insurance, that's your pension and health care, you have to work 3/4 of a full-time employee's hours.
Which is usually around 30 to 40 hours.
Exactly. So by clocking the contracts just below that 30-hour threshold, at 29.5, the dispatch companies can argue that their workers are ineligible.
So they're actively denying them basic benefits. Not because they don't work hard, but because of a legal maneuver.
A loophole.
Yeah.
They're offloading the costs of insurance and pension onto the employee or onto the public system. And this is even though the actual work time, when you factor in mandatory breaks, travel between schools, prep work, it often goes well beyond 30 hours.
But the number on the paper is all that matters.
The official contracted time ensures the company saves a fortune, and the teacher loses vital benefits and any sense of future security. It is exploitation through technicality.
And if that wasn't bad enough for the workers, there's an even bigger question mark over the legality of the whole arrangement between the schools and the dispatch companies.
This is fundamental. MEXT, the National Education Ministry, has expressed very serious concerns that many of these contracts are actually illegal business consignment agreements. They're called Gyomu Yutaku.
And that's a serious violation of the school education law.
A very serious one.
So break that down. What does Gyomu Itaku mean for the school in practice?
Okay, so the school education law is crystal clear. The school principal must have management, control, and authority over all school personnel. That includes ALTs.
Right.
But when a board of education signs one of these Gyomu Itaku contracts, they are functionally outsourcing the management of the ALT to the dispatch company. The training, the discipline, the HR, it all goes to the company.
So the principal loses the legal right to actually direct the teacher in their own school?
Precisely. Because the ALT's true legal employer is the dispatch company, not the school. This dual management confusion isn't just inefficient, it's illegal. It undermines the school's entire governance structure,
All in the pursuit of cheap labor.
which leads to systemic legal compromise. And that compromise, along with the fragmentation, it creates this vicious cycle of precarity, no matter how dedicated the individual teacher is.
Which brings us to the story of Elena.
A perfect example. Elena was a dispatch ALT who was the model of dedication. She spent 3 years working tirelessly, building amazing rapport with her students, with the local teachers. She was part of the community.
But then the contract went up for bid.
And her company lost. In the eyes of the new contractor, those 3 years of hard work, of experience, of institutional memory, all of it was just wiped clean.
She was casualty of a business decision, a line on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. To stay in the same area, her only choice was to sign on with the new company. And that meant accepting a substantially lower salary and having her seniority completely reset to zero. Her professional capital meant nothing.
Educational continuity, teacher welfare, all secondary to market competition.
And it's not just the dispatch workers. Even the long-serving, culturally fluent people in the direct hire model aren't immune to this.
The story of Kenji is so illustrative here.
It really is. Here you have a third-generation Korean-Japanese ALT.
Yeah.
Hired directly by the Board of Education. He has flawless Japanese language skills, innate cultural fluency. He is the ideal bridge.
A huge asset.
A truly invaluable asset to his hometown school. And yet, after 5 years, he was forced out because of specific contract limits designed to prevent any non-permanent staff from gaining permanent civil servant status.
It didn't matter how good he was or how connected he was.
None of it mattered.
Yep.
He had to watch a newly created permanent English position go to a Japanese teacher. A qualified teacher, yes, but one who completely lacked his depth of experience. His expertise was rejected by rigid bureaucratic rules.
Which just confirms that the system is engineered for high turnover. It's designed to keep the foreign labor force perpetually transient.
So this precarity isn't an accident. It's not a bug. It's a feature.
It's built right into the DNA of the system, which takes us from the sort of micro-tragedy of the individual teacher to the macro-level power structures. Is this precarity just about saving money, or is it fundamental to how English is used as a tool of power?
That is the essential transition we have to make. We have to stop seeing ELT policy as just, an attempt to teach English better.
And start seeing it as what?
As a mechanism of social and economic control. The intense drive for English acquisition across Northeast Asia, especially in Japan and Korea, is fundamentally tied to maximizing national competitiveness within this dominant neoliberal financial world.
And the theoretical framework for this is Philipson's idea of linguistic imperialism.
That's the one, from 1992. Philipson basically argues that the global spread of English and the ways it's taught functions as a vehicle for propagating structural and social inequalities.
So English becomes a tool for social reproduction.
Exactly. It reinforces hegemonic paradigms and monolingual control that maintain existing Anglophonic power structures all over the globe.
And in this model, Japan and Korea are in what's called the expanding circle, the periphery.
Right. They are norm-dependent. They rely heavily on the inner circle nations, the center, so the US, the UK, Canada, for all their linguistic norms.
And the local elites in Japan and Korea, the policymakers, the business leaders, they become what Philipson calls counterparts and collaborators.
Yes. They're the ones who reinforce English dominance locally. And not necessarily out of some blind obedience, but because it serves their immediate interest in elite formation and privilege, it helps them stay on top.
Let's look at the material evidence for that, the structural indicators. South Korea is a fascinating case study with this phenomenon called Yeonjeo Yopung.
English fever. And the fever pitch in Korea is just, it's astounding. English test scores aren't just for school. They are a critical gatekeeper for social advancement.
They determine everything. University access, getting a good white-collar job.
Everything.
Yeah.
We have data showing over 90% of employees in manufacturing and export industries are constantly being assessed on their English. It makes learning English less about communication and more about mandated compliance if you want to survive professionally.
And that kind of demand creates an absolutely massive and very stratified private education industry.
The numbers are staggering. Annual private ELT spending in South Korea was estimated at between $15 and $17 billion.
Billion with a B.
With a B. That is an enormous amount of private capital being poured into English acquisition. And that economic pressure instantly creates a stratified system designed to preserve the existing social order.
Let's break down that stratification with the numbers.
Okay, so back in 2010, the data revealed this severe inequity. 70% of students from high-earning families, we're talking 5 million won a month or more, were using private English education.
70%. And for low-earning families?
Only 20% for families earning less than 1 million won a month. So the ability to get this crucial linguistic capital is directly tied to your parents' income.
So ELT isn't a tool for empowerment, it's a mechanism of elimination.
Precisely. Under the guise of meritocracy, it ensures the financially disadvantaged are structurally excluded from joining the elite.
And we see Japan following a similar path, even if it's maybe a little more subtle.
Exactly. Japan's policies, like the Top Global University Project from 2014, consciously concentrate investment into a small and competitively selected top tier of society. It's the same dynamic.
And then you have these private English immersion schools in so-called special zones,
which create an immediate financial barrier. Tuition at these places can be over $10,000 a year per child. So in both countries, this linguistic capital, which is framed as essential for globalization, is made financially inaccessible to the majority of the public. It just preserves the status quo.
And beyond the money, the ideology, the way ELT is sold to the public, is just as important for keeping the structure in place.
Hugely important. In Korea, the ideology of Sagewa, or globalization, took hold after the 1997 Asian financial crisis. President Kim Dae-jung explicitly positioned English as the key to economic recovery.
It became a matter of national survival.
And that rhetoric just intensified. President Lee Myung-bak described the global arena as a battlefield and English as a key weapon for survival. This isn't neutral education talk, it's social Darwinist framing.
Linking your personal success directly to compliance with global economic demands.
Which reinforces the hegemony of English. Japan's ideology is a bit more complicated, though. It's characterized by this dual framing, Kokutaika versus Gurubaruka.
And this really speaks to that internal contradiction we saw with the ALT role itself.
It really does. Kokusaika, or internationalization, is the older policy. It's about engaging with the world, but while fiercely protecting and emphasizing Japanese identity. English is a tool, but a tool that must serve Japanese goals.
Whereas Gurubaruka, globalization, is newer and demands. What, passive compliance?
Yes, passive compliance with external, usually Western, norms and systems.
So Kokuseka is engaging the world on our terms. And Gurubaruka is engaging the world on their terms.
That's a perfect summary. And this dual framing creates a kind of policy paralysis. On one hand, the state pushes English. On the other, there's this deep inward drive for cultural protectionism.
I've heard academics there talk about the black ship of ELO.
Yes, recognizing it as a potential threat to their linguistic sovereignty. And this contradiction explains everything about the ALT. The ALT is welcomed as a symbol of internationalization, Kokusaika, but is simultaneously blocked from making any real pedagogical changes, Gurubaruka, that would disrupt the local harmony, the wa.
So ultimately, these state-driven ELT policies in both countries function almost exactly as Foucault described disciplinary power.
They create what he called docile bodies for the neoliberal order. By constantly framing English as a weapon for survival, the state manipulates people into seeking advancement by complying with global capitalism.
So the system trains people for local corporate hierarchies.
But the actual outcome sustains global inequality and benefits only the local elite collaborators. It's about enhancing global capital, not necessarily the learner's own agency.
And all of this is reinforced by these core methodological flaws, the so-called fallacies of ELT, that are embedded in programs like JT and Korea's EPIC.
Right. There are 5 key fallacies that really prioritize inner circle English above all else. The first is the subtractive fallacy,
Which is?
strengthening English at the direct expense of other languages.
Yeah.
You see it in Japanese secondary school data. Only 4% of classes are Korean, 11% are Chinese. The focus is overwhelmingly on English.
Signaling which linguistic capital is valuable and which isn't.
Then there's the early start fallacy, the belief that you have to start as young as possible. And that's coupled with the monolingual fallacy,
The English-only classroom.
which actually limits the use of the student's first language, which we know is highly effective for deeper understanding. But it's all done to push this inner circle proficiency.
And the most central one, for the ALT at least, is the native speaker fallacy.
This is the ideological core that justifies the whole fragmented system. It says the ideal teacher is a native speaker, and that the authenticity of their accent is more important than their actual teaching skill.
And that's why JG and EPIC can hire thousands of people without teaching licenses.
Exactly. The system values the accent more than the qualification. And finally, you have the maximum exposure fallacy, the belief that more English is always better, regardless of the quality.
So the entire doctrine is structurally flawed. It has to be monolingual, taught by native speakers, as early and as often as possible.
And it ensures the system serves global capitalism and social stratification, not necessarily the holistic needs of the student.
Okay, so given that theoretical background, we really need to look at how different countries in the region manage these programs on the ground. We have Japan's patchwork and Korea's EPIC, but let's bring in Taiwan's TFEP and Hong Kong's net schemes.
Right, because a key study that compared these schemes found a really direct, measurable correlation.
Which was?
The higher the recruitment standards, the better the contract quality and the higher the professional status. Where standards were higher, outcomes for everyone were better.
That's a critical finding. So programs that require actual teaching qualifications and experience
consistently offered better contracts, higher status, and more real responsibilities for their native English teachers, or NETs. Let's just look at the requirements side by side.
Okay. Japan's JET and Korea's EPIC, as we said. BA required, but no teaching experience or qualification mandated. They're running on the native speaker fallacy.
Now compare that to Taiwan's TFATP. A BA is required, experience is preferred, but for their certified English teacher roles, a state-issued teaching license is mandatory.
It's required.
It's required. And then you have Hong Kong's MET schemes, which are the highest standard. BA required, experience preferred, and a teaching qualification is absolutely mandatory.
That structural difference just professionalizes the entire experience from day one.
It does. Hong Kong's schemes are recognized as having the most rigorous standards for recruiting and, crucially, the most developed professional development support.
And that support isn't just for the foreign teachers.
No, it extends to the local English teachers, the LETs, and to curriculum development. And on top of all that, Hong Kong is the only one of the four that has consistently conducted and published external, rigorous evaluations of its programs.
A real commitment to transparency and effectiveness.
And by setting those high standards, Hong Kong and Taiwan immediately get rid of so many of the status and precarity issues we see in Japan and Korea.
Because the foreign teacher walks into the school with recognized professional credentials.
They're hired as teachers, not as temporary assistants. Now, despite these differences, a common goal across all the programs is to improve student proficiency through team teaching.
But the effectiveness of that co-teaching is completely dependent on collaboration, and that needs a precise definition, right? It's not just two people standing in a room.
Not at all. True collaboration means working as equal partners, not senior and junior, to achieve a shared goal by pooling expertise and problem solving together.
And co-teaching is a specific form of that.
Yes, where equal partners contribute different types of expertise, linguistic fluency, cultural context, pedagogical knowledge, to jointly plan, implement, and then evaluate classroom activities.
A study by Copland and colleagues in 2016 identified some critical factors for making this work, and every single one highlights a weakness in the Japanese system.
It really does. The first factor is consistent ongoing communication about roles and expectations. Second, dedicated planning time.
Which is almost impossible for an ALT traveling between multiple schools.
A total impossibility. Third is genuine cross-cultural understanding from both sides. And fourth is flexibility, being willing to accommodate different teaching methods.
So the study's recommendations are basically a prescription for fixing Japan and Korea.
They are. Induction for both the NET and the lead SATE. Roles and expectations must be clearly discussed before the school year starts. And most importantly, time must be allocated for joint planning.
And what about the status issue created by hiring unqualified native speakers?
That's maybe the most essential recommendation. For schemes like JET and EPIC, those status issues have to be carefully monitored, because hiring unqualified NETs inherently risks making the local teachers feel inferior.
Which completely undermines the whole idea of an equal partnership.
It's insidious. If you bring in an unqualified native speaker and give them higher status just because of their passport or accent, you're telling the highly qualified local teacher that their years of effort and local knowledge are less valuable.
And when that collaboration fails, the system just defaults to what the research calls isolation, stagnation, and replication.
Teachers retreat, they replicate old, ineffective methods, and innovation just dies.
Because collaboration is the engine of the synergy cycle. Can you just remind us how that works?
Sure. So creativity is the spark, right? Conceiving of something original. Innovation is the implementation, actually doing it in the classroom. And collaboration is the vital link that connects the idea to the execution. It's just too hard to invent and implement something new all by yourself.
An example might be an ALT and an LET creating a student writing project that ends up as a published class anthology.
A perfect example. That requires joint planning, shared expertise, and trust. That kind of high-level innovation motivates students and prevents teacher burnout. But you can't do it without support, training, clear goals, and planning time.
All the things that are missing in the fragmented system.
Exactly. So instead of creating a learning community, you just reinforce the dichotomy between the local and the foreign teacher, often damaging the local teacher's professional confidence in the process.
So it seems like Hong Kong and Taiwan have kind of solved this by just requiring professional credentials from the start. They bypass that whole imbalance.
And that allows them to focus their resources on curriculum and support, not on constantly managing status conflicts.
But even if Japan fixed all of that, the fragmentation, the precarity, there's still this powerful set of cultural forces that acts as a kind of internal wall against full integration. And the key concept here is wa.
Yes, wa. It's a deep-seated philosophical and social value in Japan. It means equilibrium, harmony, consensus. It often represents the nation itself. In human relationships, it's about ensuring that everyone's actions and words stay within certain boundaries according to predefined rules and order.
And this isn't just a passive idea. It's actively taught and reinforced throughout the entire school system.
From a very young age, kids are steeped in the practical requirements of WA through collective work, cleaning their own classrooms, serving lunch, mandatory club activities.
And that instills two core behavioral norms.
Right. First, that nonconformity brings shame, so you must do what the group does. And second, absolute respect for the senpai-kohai hierarchical relationship.
The senior-junior dynamic, based purely on age or how long you've been there.
Exactly. And it's mandatory and pervasive. It requires respectful language towards seniors and reinforces this rigid awareness of order and rank. Now, while WA provides incredibly strong community bonds and support,
That's the downside.
a big one, it can also act as chains that preserve traditional order and rules, making it exceedingly difficult for new ideas or individual talents to flourish if they deviate from the established path.
And this cultural demand for predictable group cohesion inevitably clashes with the dynamic, communicative teaching style the ALT is often hired to introduce.
This is the core contradiction in the classroom. The system wants the results of dynamic teaching, but it rejects the disruption caused by the method. We see this perfectly in the story of David, the young, enthusiastic ALT.
Right. David embraced active learning. His classes were loud, students were shouting answers, moving around, laughing, the exact communicative environment he was told to create.
But his approach was fundamentally at odds with the head English teacher, Suzuki Sensei, who valued calm, focus, and predictable harmony.
So after a particularly lively class, David wasn't openly criticized.
No, that would disrupt WA in the staff room. He was passively undermined.
How so?
Suzuki Sensei later retaught the exact same content, but using quiet, textbook-based methods, translation drills, silent reading, that restored the classroom to the expected state of calm and conformity.
So the message was clear. The foreign method is engaging, but it's disruptive. It's secondary to the need for local order.
The ALT is an ornament, but their method is a threat. It's an impossible contradiction. You're invited to innovate, but culturally penalized when you do.
And this perpetual ambiguity is right there in the job title, assistant language teacher. Even if you have a master's degree, you are an assistant.
The term assistant defines the entire structure of belonging. Engagement without integration.
Yeah.
You are invited in, you are visible, but you are always peripheral. You are in the school, but never of the school.
And this is often rationalized away by that phrase you hear among Jet Ds, ESID. Every situation is different.
ESID is a coping mechanism. It naturalizes all the inconsistency and lets the system off the hook. If every failure is just a unique personality clash, then the system itself is never held responsible for the lack of training or consistent job descriptions.
And the ambiguity serves a purpose. It keeps outsiders present but contained.
Precisely. And nothing confirms this rejection of long-term expertise more than the story of Kenji, the direct hire Korean-Japanese ALT.
He wasn't a temporary outsider. He had perfect cultural fluency, deep community ties.
And his forced departure, because of that arbitrary contract limit, just illustrates the design. The limit exists to prevent any non-permanent staff from achieving permanent status. His fluency and 5 years of investment were explicitly rejected by the bureaucracy.
Which confirms the system prioritizes rules and turnover over competence and commitment.
It's built to manage distance, even for those who are already in many ways on the inside.
Okay, so we've mapped out the structural flaws, the theoretical framework, the cultural walls. What does the research say is the practical, critical, missing link needed to make these systems actually effective?
The answer that comes up again and again in studies across Japan, Korea, and Taiwan is consistent and simple. A profound lack of clarity regarding the net's professional role.
And a lack of time.
And fundamentally, the lack of time for local teachers to co-plan. Without clear roles and dedicated paid time, quality team teaching is simply impossible.
And when it fails, the consequences are severe.
The most damaging consequence is that it reinforces the professional dichotomy between the net and the LET. Instead of feeling empowered, local teachers often develop a sense of professional inferiority, a lack of confidence in their own abilities.
Thinking they always have to rely on the native speaker as the ultimate authority.
And the way out of that, the research argues, is through that synergetic cycle. Collaboration, creativity, and innovation. We have to create the professional space for those three things to thrive together.
Moving beyond just replication and stagnation.
Right. Creativity is the spark. Innovation is the implementation. And collaboration is the professional engine that connects the idea to its execution. Without trust and shared expertise, creativity stays locked in one person's head, and innovation never happens.
And this requires institutional support, not just individual goodwill.
Absolutely. Think about adopting a whole new teaching methodology. That requires joint planning time, joint curriculum development. If the teachers are isolated or the ALT is running between 11 schools, it's dead on arrival.
So systems that actively foster this cycle, like in Hong Kong and Taiwan, are the ones that can actually prevent teacher burnout and improve student achievement.
So to kind of sum up the whole challenge here.
Yeah.
The political reality uses the rhetoric of globalization to say English is essential for national competitiveness.
But the structural execution in Japan, the fragmentation into low-wage, short-term, limited-term positions, creates an environment designed for high turnover and low professional investment.
It's a mechanism to ensure expertise is constantly rented and replaced, but never actually integrated.
And the outcome is a profound loss of agency for everyone involved, for the learners and for the dedicated educators, both foreign and local.
They're all caught in a system that perpetually manages distance instead of fostering genuine professional integration, and which, at the end of the day, just sustains linguistic and social elitism.
So we've seen Japan's fragmented system, with its reliance on temporary and low-status contracts, stand in really sharp contrast to models like Hong Kong and Taiwan, which prioritize qualifications and robust collaborative support.
And that structural deficiency is just compounded by these deep-seated cultural forces, the constraints of law and rigid hierarchy, which ensure the ALT remains a symbol, but is simultaneously prevented from fully integrating or exercising professional autonomy.
And so the small, quiet differences we talked about at the very beginning, that gap between a simple welcome and a deep welcome home, they mirror the complex, structural, and often exhausting realities faced by foreign educators trying to bridge these cultural and professional worlds in a system that values their presence but ultimately rejects their full professional integration.